Hello, I'd like to welcome you to today's Experience Center. My name is Bill Howard. I'm the product line manager for vertical machining centers here at Makino. Today we're going to talk about the DA500, a new product that we're launching. Obviously, it makes a growing family of the DA series. Currently we have the DA300. This would be the DA500. You'll notice there's a chat box for Q&A, and down here there's a message box. So as we're going through the Experience Center today, if questions pop into your mind, feel free to type those in and send. And time permitting, we'll address as many of those as possible at the end of the Experience Center. Today, I'm coming to you from Experience Center number 1 at our Makino Mason facility. There's actually 2 Experience Centers here, number 1 and number 2 down the hall. At Auburn Hills, which is just north of Detroit in Michigan, we have 2 more Experience Centers. While we're talking about Experience Centers, let me just put out this little commercial. These Experience Centers allow us to get groups of folks together, utilize the high-tech board, communications, drawings, everything. So if you're thinking and you would like to sit down with our folks, we can arrange a confidential, focused, doesn't matter whether you want to talk about the machine, whether you want to talk about your part, application, automation, we can focus on what you want. The nice thing about this is we can get more of our folks around the table here. We can get more of your folks around the table there, so we have more people involved, and it really keeps down the expenses because it costs very little or nothing. The other thing we have is cameras on a lot of the machines. So we can actually go out and bring a camera into the meeting and show you actually what's going on that machine. So keep it in the back of your mind. Again, a little commercial about the Experience Center. If you would like to set up a meeting like that, please feel free to contact your local Makino representative and we can set that up for you. What we're going to talk about today is the DA500. This is a brand new product. It's an expansion of the DA product line. Now has the DA300 and obviously now the 500. This machine looks like this. It looks a lot like the DA300. The unique aspect or option of the machine is we can add a pallet magazine to the machine, and that can be done aftermarket. So you don't have to make that decision up front. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Basic sizes of the machine. Here you can see the basic DA500, and here's a layout showing the DA500 with the pallet magazine on the front of the machine. So it's very compact. So you have a lot of productivity in a very small floor space, which obviously brings up your profitability. Well, how big is this thing? Well, it's 800 by 900 by 550. The tilt table is 150 degrees, so it goes away from you 30, comes towards you minus 120, and there's a full 360 table on it. So that just shows the basic layouts of X, Y, and Z around the workpiece. How's it built? Well, it's built a lot like the DA300, only obviously bigger. It has the slant column structure that allows us to lighten up the carrier, but yet maintain high stiffness and rigidity. Very rigid column with an opening, allowing us to move the tilt trunnion table back underneath there. For good stiffness and rigidity, very short tool lengths, very accurate. Talking about that, we've actually lowered where the ball screw is at by about 5%. Again, increasing the stiffness and rigidity. There's the terrace that allows the cutting forces to transfer into and down into the column. Here's the way most traditional machine tools are built. You'll notice the distance from the front of the column to the center of the spindle. What we've done is we have moved everything back, collapsed everything back. So we've minimized, with the terrace column, we've minimized the distance from the center to the front. So high cutting capability, very good stiffness and rigidity, very high accuracy. So one of the advantages of the DA500. Another thing we've done is the column itself, we talked about the terrace, but the column itself allows for the tilt trunnion table to pass back underneath. Well, we've made these column legs, if you will, 50% wider. So more stiffness, more rigidity. So that gives us extremely good accuracy throughout the working volume of the machine. Now you'll notice a couple other things here. First off, the y-axis. You'll notice there's 2 ball screws. Well, if you think about it, if you try to drive a relatively long axis with 1 ball screw, you could get wind up, and that's not good for accuracy and precision. So we actually drive this from both ends so that we're going to make sure that we're not getting foreshortening or stretching of the y-axis ball screw. Single ball screw, double motors. Also, the x-axis, you'll notice there's X1, X2. There's actually 2 dual ball screws, tandem drive, double motors, to make sure that we're moving extremely quick, but yet good stiffness and rigidity for cutting applications. You can see there where the operator position would be. Rapid traverse rates were 60 meters a minute, X and Z, 58 on Y. Tilting, 50 RPM on the tilting axis and 100 RPM on the rotating axis. Feed rates, we can feed up to 50 meters a minute. Now here's a animation of XYZ. You'll notice high speed, high precision, high rigidity. Also shows a layout there of the axes, XYZ, relative to the tilt rotary, and the fact that you can move that back under the column. Some classic DA type or Makino-esque type features. Number one, it's a closed structure machine. So it's symmetrical castings, very large castings, gives us stiffness and rigidity, that tapered terrace on the column. Again, accuracy, stiffness, repeatability. It's also very thermally stable. Because it's symmetrically designed, as it would grow as your shop temperature changes, it maintains alignments and accuracies. We've also incorporated our classic core-cooled ball screws with the bearing packages. So you've got a shorter warm-up cycle. You can lower the operating temperature of the systems. You got less thermal growth. You can reduce the operating temperature of the components. In the mechanical world, anytime you can reduce the operating temperature of those components, you've got longer component life. All positive benefits. Precision. Much like the smaller DA300, the DA500 is plus or minus 1.5 micron positioning. We use Mori scale feedback. Repeatability is 1 micron, plus or minus. And if you're not familiar with Mori scales, they're a very unique type scale. They're an optic scale. Basically, one scale moves past the other. There's a light, and you're literally counting fringe pattern, light fringe patterns. So it's non-contacting, it's not mechanical, it's not magnetic, it's extremely tight accuracies, 0.05 micron divisions. So very accurate machine. We've also incorporated some of our shared technology, the Vision Broken Tool System, which we'll talk about in a minute, inertial active compensation, and advanced motion control, things like GI drilling, GI milling, GI tapping. So here's another VP control. Basically, we build the machine, we go in and we calibrate XYZ tilt rotary, But then we go in with VP control and we literally map that work zone, XYZ tilt rotary, so that here's a part, we're basically 100 millimeter diameter cylinder that we cut up into 18 different faces, and we machine each one of those faces individually. And you'll notice as a composite, each step's within 5 micron. It's VP control. I mentioned inertial active compensation. If you think about it, as you tilt and rotate a pallet or a table, inertia is going to impact the precision of that move. So we use inertial active compensation to allow us to compensate for the inertia as you tilt and rotate the pallet. And you can actually teach the machine for a given pallet the inertia. So that's part of that feature. We're also introducing, you'll notice left and right, GI breaker. It's a new feature. You'll notice how many of you have drilled and ended up with all that ugliness around the tool. Well, GI breaker allows us now to do that drilling operation without a PEX cycle, having to slow down the process, without getting all of those ugly chips around the tool. Some other things we've done, the A-axis for the tilt. We've lowered that center of gravity or center of that axis. That gives us to the driving point. That gives us more stiffness, more rigidity, and gives us very, very good performance, movement characteristics. It also allows us to go in and out over top of the down support for pallet changing. And there's what that looks like with the table tilted almost all the way over. Remember, it goes 30 one way and 120 the other. This is just the layout. The machine comes with a 500 millimeter integral table, and this is showing the travels X, Y, and obviously Z laid out around the maximum workpiece. Notice that's an 800 millimeter diameter workpiece on there. And there's what the tabletop would look like. This is showing it with a 400 millimeter square pallet. Again, 800 millimeter diameter workpiece, shows the X, Y, and Z strokes laid out around that maximum workpiece size. This is what the tabletop would look like, as you can see. Now, let's talk about the spindle. This machine, number one, it's a HSK A63, it's a 20,000 RPM spindle. But notice the power and torque capability. We got 60 horsepower, 35 horsepower continuous. As far as the torque, you're 110 foot-pounds of torque with 50 foot-pounds of torque continuous. So the characteristics provide a very good power, range, and a very good torque range. So this machine can be used for heavy milling, drilling, boring. It can also be used for hog outs if you want to go into a five-side machining type application and start with a basic block of aluminum and hog out your workpiece from there. So very versatile spindle with a lot of capability. Here you're looking at a heavy milling capability cut there. Here you're looking at a drilling application. Notice the table's horizontal here. Now we're doing the exact same thing with the table vertical. The key thing here is we want to provide characteristics that are the same, whether the pallet's horizontal or whether the pallet's vertical. And that obviously dictates that you can do the same kind of machining, whether the pallet's horizontal or vertical. There's a number of neat things. This is a 400 volt machine, like most of the machines we're introducing. And there's some unique things that happen. Here's one, the new spindle on this machine. We've reduced by 2/3 the spindle spool up, spool down time. So we've went from 5.4 seconds down to 1.7 seconds. So that's non-cut time. So you can see every time you spool up or spool down that spindle, we've reduced the non-cut time. The other thing we've done, this is conventional, this is the new. You'll notice a much smaller nose, a much bigger reach, so you can get out into the workpiece and over the pallet. The other thing, by the 400 volts, you'll notice we have much more power output than traditional or conventional, and much more torque output in the same spindle, even though it's smaller in design. Let's talk about tools. If you're familiar with the DA300, the DA500 has the same thing. 60 tools is standard, 118 is optional. And you can see here we go up to 70 millimeter diameter standard, 140 with adjacent pockets empty. You're looking at 300 millimeters long and about 8 kg. It'll change a tool in about 1.5 seconds. That's tool to tool, chip to chip. So chip to chips from down in the middle of the work zone at half RPM, goes all the way over, changes and comes back to that same position, middle of the work zone, XYZ, and up to half RPM. 4.5 seconds. Again, it's collapsing down all your non-productive, non-cut times. Going to look, here's a tool change. See it go in, pick up a face mill. You'll notice a very unique part there. That happens to be a semiconductor part. You'll notice we're going to mill the surface of it, and then we're going to flip it up and we're going to mill around the sides. So this is a classic example of 5-sided machining or 5-face machining. We're going to go back and change tools here. Now we're going to come out with a drill and we're going to do some of the same type of stuff, again, around on different surfaces. The unique thing about this is in one setup you can get access to all 5 faces. And by doing all that work in one setup, your accuracy is much tighter. Tool changer, classic ATC 60. You'll see there the drum, the ring goes down. You'll notice that flash of light. That's the vision broken tool sensing standard on the machine. What we do is we take a digital image of that tool. We take it as it's going into the work zone. We take it as it's coming out from the work zone. We compare that to what it ought to be, and we can detect for broken tooling in process. The neat thing about this, again, it does it outside of the work zone so that it's not impacting. There's no added non-cut times. This is all done internal. We're checking it going out. We're checking it coming back. The worst case would be you go out there and drill a bunch of holes, and then on the way back you check it and the tool's broken. Now you're going to go out with a tap. Well, by checking it coming back, that's going to prevent that from happening. We've added some functionality to the vision broken tool sensing. With that image, you're an operator and you go out and you do some tool maintenance and you accidentally put the wrong tool in the wrong pocket, let's say. You put a face mill where a drill should be. Well, as that tool comes around and comes in, we take an image of that tool. A face mill image is going to look very, very different than a drill image. So that allows us to compare and basically prevent the wrong tool from ending up in the process. So that's some of the new functionality to prevent misplacement of tools and feeding them into the operation. It's going to catch that kind of thing. I mentioned 118. Again, just like the DA300, the DA500 can have a base 60 tool ring and an expansion. And this can be done in the field. So you can go from 60 to 118 tools. There's a shutter that shutters tools from the outer ring to the tool change position or the inner ring to the tool change position. You can load, unload tools to these magazines independently, and they both service the spindle the same way. So consequently, there's no additional seek times or wait times. So again, reducing your non-cut time in manufacturing. Now, this is a very unique feature for Makino. The DA500 will feature a turning specification as an option. You'll notice it's a 500 millimeter diameter table. We can go up to a 800 millimeter diameter and about 435 millimeters tall, 30 kg workload. So that's the capability there. You're looking at 800 RPM. So this is a turning configuration to the DA500 machine. How do we do that, you might say? How can you do turning on a milling spindle? Well, we've went in and designed, there's our milling spindle. We've designed a unique feature back here. It's a curvic coupling where we can engage that curvic coupling and it takes all the load off the spindle bearings and it'll hold the tool for turning stiff, rigid, in a stiff, rigid, still position for turning versus a rotating position that you do for milling. So that's the difference. That's one of the unique features. What about sacrificing power and torque? Well, here's the power and torque curves for the 20,000 RPM optional turning spindle spec. You'll notice what we don't want to sacrifice is the milling capability for face milling and drilling. So it's very, very similar to the base milling configuration. So we can have a turning configuration without sacrificing the productivity typical of the milling and drilling spindle. This is showing a layout, the 500 millimeter diameter turning pallet. And again, it's got the travels X, Y, and Z laid out relative to the maximum size workpiece. There's the top of the table, 500 millimeter diameter. You'll notice it uses cones, traditional Makino design with the cone spacing, 200 millimeter cone spacing. Now, you might recognize that part. In the past, to make this part, you'd do it on a mill, and you also notice we're turning now. So in the past, you'd do this on a mill, then you'd take it over to a VTL or a turning machine, so you've got different machines, more floor space, more power, more coolant. This combines it all in one machine. So now in one setup, you can do the milling and you can do the turning. So not only the milling, 5 sides on the milling, and now you're looking at the turning. Here's a tool change, changing the turning tools. So that gives you an idea of the optional turning capability for the DA500. We can turn not only with the table in the horizontal, this is showing turning with the table tilted at 90 degrees. Now, chip and coolant, again, if you're familiar with the DA300, the DA500 does the same kind of thing. Most of the competition tries to get everything down into a couple narrow troughs and back through. We actually open up with a big wide trough underneath, big opening, so you can get all the chips and coolant out the back of the machine. This is what that looks like. Here you can see the table and obviously the coolant. You'll notice as that table tips open, there's a whole open area underneath here that the chips and coolant can flow back through. Coolant. This is showing obviously nozzles around the spindle, through spindle coolant, terrace wash, that's the tool changer side. There's the robot shutter, which is standard on the front of the machine. Overhead wash you can see above, and in a minute you'll see on the operator side the terrace wash. So the idea is everything washes down into that center trough and out the back of the machine. Now, what do I do with all those? Anybody ever seen these before? Curly, ugly, gnarly chips, particularly as you do turning operations. You get these big, long, stringy things. We talked about GI breaker for drilling, traditional milling drilling. What do you do here? Well, you'll notice we've went to a 2-stage conveyor, a hinged belt design with a scraper design to handle these kind of chips. So we have a dual lift-up chip conveyor with the hinge and the scraper belt. Also, one of the problems has been kind of like, I don't want to call it sludge, but sludge building up in the tank. And if the coolant's not moved around or agitated, that tends to accelerate. So standard on this machine is an agitator in the tank to prevent the particulate from dropping out of the coolant. So now we have a much better chance of filtering it, much higher cleanliness of your coolant on the machine. Earlier I talked about an optional pallet changer. This shows the base machine, this shows the machine with the optional pallet changer on it for the DA500. It is optional and it can be added after the fact, after market. So you don't have to make up your mind right away. Get the machine, get work into the machine, and then as you need more pallets, you can obviously add the pallet changer, pallet magazine. Here's what it looks like. It's a carousel. And one of the neat things about it, because there's a variety of sizes and heights of workpiece, we've taken the Vision Broken Tool System and kind of adapted it to the workset station, where we now have the ability with a camera to actually look at that workpiece and gauge diameter and height and check to make sure that that's the workpiece that ought to be on that pallet. Here you can see the pallet change arm coming in, classic Makino 4-cone position. Here's your tilt rotary table. So there's the pallet changer. This is out in the pallet changer itself, looking towards the machine. So you can see the arm, the pallets would rotate around. You pick up you go in and get the pallet, bring it back out, rotate, pick up the next pallet, and then put it into the machine. There are a number of pallet configurations. The top, you can have 6 pallets, you can have 4 pallets, and it all depends on the diameter of those pallets. Key thing to remember here, while the pallet magazine is retrofittable, the pallet configurations, in other words, the deck, the top surface, is fixed. So once you get an idea, you can choose the configuration you want on the pallet magazine. The pallet magazine comes with a load-unload station. Here you can see the door, it's interlocked, and a load-unload station operation panel, which is the means by controlling the pallet magazine. Now this video, you can see, you can manage each pallet, multiple faces. There was 2, 4 faces. This is talking about machining time and when it's going to be completed. This is your queue of pallets to be transferred to the load-unload station. So it's a very simple, visually driven, and you'll notice the different colors, very graphic to allow you to run this pallet magazine very productively. Once you set it up, you simply load and unload pallets, hit send, and off it goes. Some of the same traditional features from the DA300 and the DA500. Collision safeguard. This is real-time crash avoidance. Here's an example without the function. You'll notice we're milling around the periphery in C, and now we're going to do an A, and notice the red tool, uh-oh, it's gone. We had a collision, we've destroyed the tool. I mean, that tool was made of wax. If it wasn't, if it were a real tool, you got to worry about spindle damage, damage to the workpiece, the fixture, the machine. Well, now we're going to show you the same exact program. Look at the red tool, same machining around in C. Now we're going to try and do that A tilt, and notice it stops and generates an alarm. That alarm is telling you that you didn't retract Z enough in order to tilt the A axis. So it's avoided the collision, saved you time, money, effort in, machine downtime potentially, tooling, fixtures, workpiece, all of that. And that is a feature that's collision safeguard is standard on all Makino 5-axis products. And if you are willing to, as you do your programming, build your models, your solid models for your toolpath and all that. You can import those using a utility, and that will allow you to get to level 2 of collision safeguard, which provides this type of protection. The other feature of the DA500, we're introducing, or we're moving, if you will, from the FANUC 3i-B to the FANUC 31i-B5 plus control. So with that plus control from FANUC, now it's still going to say Makino Pro 6 on the outside, it's still going to have SGI 0.5, but with this plus control, there's going to be an appearance change, there's going to be some increased computing power, there's going to be some added standard FANUC features, some new machine functions. Appearance change, this is kind of out with the old kind of thing, in with the new. You'll notice the keyboard's been rearranged, and so have a lot of the buttons on the control. So that's one, it's going to look different. The other thing, in addition to the appearance change, we've changed the layout to keep you from having to go all over to a very simple pathway for most operations. We've also, once again, changed a lot of the machine-centric to make more sense. So they're rearranged. So the buttons were moved to make it much easier for the operator. That concludes what we have today about the DA500. And at this point in time, I'd like to open it up for some of the questions that have come in while we've been talking to you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Not seeing any questions that have come in through the chat or through the Q&A. So I'd like to encourage everybody to, if you're interested in the machine, reach out to your sales contact for Makino. If you'd like to see the machine in its North American premiere, join us at the IMTS show September 9th through the 14th, where we'll be demonstrating the DA500, doing both milling and turning in live cutting demonstrations. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.